Hello and welcome. Was that too loud?
We may have blown your speakers.
To the What podcast. I am one of your hosts, Eric Creech, and joining me today, now that he's built his podcasting equipment in a cave with a box of scraps, Kyle Whitley.
We may need to build you a new computer system because we may have blown your speakers with those box of scraps.
We're still in experimenting with our sound. Maybe you don't have to turn us all the way up to 50 on your radio now.
We'll see.
We'll see.
We're getting there.
We started pretty loud in the episode from 2 weeks ago, and then Rickie just jumped ahead of us.
And he didn't even have the special box.
I know. We spent all this money on the special box, and Rickie didn't even need it.
Rickie just plowed over the rest of the podcast with his
It's
gigantic
crazy.
voice.
It's crazy. But this is our first episode that we are recording in 2020.
Yep.
It is currently January the 9th, and this episode will come out on January the 13th, if I'm not mistaken.
Could be.
So
That's
we're
next Monday.
Excited to be back in studio tonight.
We are. We are finally back. It's been busy. Holiday season is finally coming to an end, but that just means the new year.
We just get busier and busier.
It does.
I mean, there's really no off season for us.
No, we stay busy.
I mean,
which is okay.
That's okay. I'd rather be busy than bored.
That's true.
So,
Sometimes I'm busy and bored.
yeah, I mean that could be pretty bad.
You got to evaluate things.
You do, but we are super excited for today's episode.
Yes, we are. We've talked about it a lot. Here we are.
This is like my homage to my favorite podcast outside of ours, the Binge Mode podcast from TheRinger.com. What a great website. Put on by Mallory Rubin and Jason Concepcion. They do Binge Mode, and they have explored Game of Thrones. They've explored Harry Potter, and they're currently exploring Star Wars. But we have beat them to the punch for, we can't really call it Binge Mode. I think they have a trademark on that or something for their podcasting. So we're going to say we're running the Infinity Gauntlet.
I'm cool with that.
I like that name.
A good phrase.
You know, we're running the Infinity Gauntlet. We're going to be going through all of the Marvel Cinematic Universe films.
It's going to take a while, folks.
Well,
we're in this for the long haul.
We're going to do one a month. Okay?
Yep.
So the current films that are out now, it will take us 2 years and a couple of months after that, because we're not going to do one in December each year because, Christmas. There's a lot of Christmas stuff we can talk about.
Yeah.
And then by the time we get done with that, there'll have been 2 or 3 more films already out. Plus maybe some Disney Plus TV shows that we can talk about as well. So this is a never-ending Infinity Gauntlet.
And we're not even talking about never-ending story. We
know.
don't have a creepy flying dog, but
Yeah.
we've got trees that walk and talk.
I've never seen the Never-Ending Story.
You should. Is it on Disney? I don't know if it's Disney
I don't know if it's on Disney or not. I remember
I promise
an
it's on some
ex-girlfriend
streaming service.
lent me the VHS.
And you didn't even watch it.
No. I didn't watch Blazing Saddles either, but I did end up seeing
What kind
that
of
one
boyfriend
later.
are you?
Well, we're not together now, so that tells you whatever you need to know. But we are excited to start exploring the Marvel Cinematic Universe today with this first episode. But before we do that, if you haven't already, folks, please subscribe to this podcast. And here's the great thing. Over my Christmas break, we have been accepted to so many new platforms.
Yes.
So maybe you already heard us on Apple Podcast or Spotify, Google Play, or Podbean, but we are also on Stitcher, TuneIn, Overcast, Castro, Pocket Cast, Podcast Addict, and Radio Public.
Yes.
Make sure to search for What the What Media, all one word, and then please rate and review us. We require, how many stars, Kyle?
I believe it's 5.
It is 5 stars. If we could do 6 in honor of the Infinity Stones, we would ask for 6, but they don't do more than 5.
See, I haven't checked out all those platforms. I don't know how many stars they do allow you on each platform.
I think they're all 5-star platforms. So please rate and review us. Leave us a comment if you'd like to.
It could be a horrible comment
but
about how bad we stink.
Yeah, but 5 stars.
Or we smell bad. Or you look funny.
Yeah,
Like, that's fine.
That's great. If you know that we look funny, then
I'm fine with that.
You're doing your deep dive into us because we don't put our faces on the podcast very much. So.
But we can find you and see what you look like.
Exactly.
Send us a picture.
We
Maybe
can
we'll
compare.
see.
We can compare looks.
Yeah.
We'll do a deep dive into that. Also, go ahead and follow us on social media on Twitter at WTW_media and on Facebook and Instagram at What the What Media. That's again all one word. Also, if you want to, feel free to head to YouTube.
Might as well.
And subscribe to our not yet active YouTube channel. That's also at What the What Media. Or I think it would be youtube.com/whatthewhatmedia there.
Should be.
We're not active on that yet. but
Nope.
we have it registered. And
We have plans.
We have plans. We talked about plans last week.
Plans are better than not having any plans at all.
Exactly. And one more thing.
Okay.
If you like this episode, you're listening to it, you like what you hear so far, you listen to the rest of it, and you're like, man, those guys are pretty awesome. Or I want to hear more from them. Or maybe you liked any of the now 30 episodes we have done.
That's crazy.
For the What podcast.
That's insane.
Then we have another request. We are trying to grow this show, and we're trying to get more listeners. We really want more people to hear us, and we need your help to do that. If you like this show, we would please ask that you share this show or this episode in particular with at least one friend. And you can share that with them on social media.
Yep.
You can just send them a text message and say, hey, check out these guys. If you do share it on social media, tag us, either us personally or the What the What accounts, and we will give you and the person you shared it with a shout out on the next episode that we record.
Whole snap.
So that's pretty cool.
I think that's a good idea.
So please share this so we can get the word out. We are averaging some pretty decent download numbers, but we have big dreams,
Big dreams.
big goals.
Yes.
So
Champagne bathrooms.
yeah,
or something.
well, yeah, I guess. I mean,
Maybe like
can
a
we
gold
make that
toilet.
much money on a podcast?
A gold toilet. That's all I want. A gold toilet.
He wants a gold toilet. I want like a new new podcasting equipment. I want us each to have a laptop at some point.
I don't need a laptop though.
Well, you're using it for recording though.
And you have an iPad.
Yeah, but I want something where I don't have to.
So you don't want to look at me. You
like-
want something giant that blocks the two of us so
Well-
we don't see each other.
Well, no, not exactly, but that's also added benefits. No, I'm just kidding. So anyway, on today's episode, we are diving into the first chapter of the MCU. Here is a huge spoiler warning for today's episode.
Yes.
That means you, Jenny Varnum.
Yes.
While the first Iron Man movie is our primary focus, we will be going deep,
Deep.
possibly discussing details from any of the other 22 Marvel Cinematic Universe films or the Marvel television shows, comic books from which the source material came from, and we're taking the entire saga into account from the moment Tony Stark took a selfie with a soldier to the present time.
Oh yeah.
So, for your consideration, arms out, bomb exploding in the background, wind swooshing in front of us. This is Iron Man. Bow, wow, 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 wow. Because we don't have the rights to that song, so
I can hear it all in my head though.
but yeah,
It's
you can-
in there now.
You can picture it.
I'm swaying back and forth, eyes closed. I hear it.
So here's some basic information about Iron Man. It came out in 2008, based on the Marvel Comics character of the same name. It was produced by Marvel Studios and distributed by Paramount Pictures. First film in the MCU, as we discussed already. It was directed by Jon Favreau, and it stars Robert Downey Jr. As Tony Stark / Iron Man, and it also stars Terrence Howard, Jeff Bridges, Sean Toub, or is it Tobe? We're going to go with Tobe, and Gwyneth Paltrow. And in this movie, Tony Stark is an industrialist, master engineer who builds a mechanized suit of armor and becomes the superhero Iron Man. This film has been in development since 1990. That's a long time, folks.
I was 3.
So almost 20 years it being in development. And it was in development at Universal at one point, 20th Century Fox, and New Line Cinemas at various times before Marvel Studios reacquired the rights to it in 2006. They put the project in production, Marvel did, as its first self-financed film. Before this, we had other Marvel films out there that were financed and backed by other studios, X-Men and Spider-Man being the notable ones that were produced by Fox and Sony, respectively. You also had Daredevil and Blade as other notable superhero films. The filming began in March 2007, concluded in June, and during the filming, the actors were free to create their own dialogue because the shooting of the film was focused on story and action. It premiered in Sydney, Australia on April 14, 2008, released in the United States on May 2nd, and it grossed over $585 million on its $140 million budget, becoming the 8th highest grossing film of 2008.
I'm pretty sure you could get a gold toilet with that. Man.
Probably. If we gross that much, for this podcast, we can afford like multiple computers and maybe like a round table.
Instead of this pop-up
Plastic one, yeah. We're talking about having guest hosts, come in and record, but Kyle said we probably need to clean up a little bit.
Yeah.
So maybe.
Because there's honestly just our junk in here.
Yeah.
It's not Rickie's fault.
It's not really Rickie's fault. It's
Ricky
our
keeps
fault.
a very clean house.
Yes, he
we
does.
just mess it up.
But this movie received praise from critics for its acting, particularly from Robert Downey Jr. The screenplay, direction, visual effects, and action sequences. It was selected by the American Film Institute as one of the 10 best films of 2008, and it received 2 nominations at the 81st Academy Awards for Best Sound Editing and Best Visual Effects. So, see, we're reviewing an Oscar-nominated film here. So
I was going to say maybe none of the other ones we've done were, but that's not true.
no, that's not true. I mean, Dead
Not
Poets
at all.
Society, I think Toy Story. I mean, we've had a lot of Oscar-nominated films because we like good movies, and sometimes we like bad movies.
And that's okay. It's okay to like bad movies.
That's okay. We're going to be doing
Put that on a shirt.
We're going to be
It's
doing the
okay to
Power
like
Rangers
bad
movie
movies.
at some point this year, and that's not necessarily a great movie, but we enjoy it.
Yeah.
So, you want me to jump into what actually happened in the movie?
Yeah, because I'm horrible at plots.
Well, I have it all written out here.
Well, great. Go for it then.
Cool. So, in this movie, Tony Stark, he has inherited the defense contractor Stark Industries from his father, Howard Stark, and he is in war-torn Afghanistan with his friend and military liaison, James Rhodes. Okay? Rhodey, as he's known to his closest friends. And he's there to demonstrate the new Jericho missile. Now, we're not talking about Chris Jericho, the wrestler. Check back in a couple of weeks, and we'll probably talk about him at some point when we talk about Royal Rumble stuff.
I feel like he should have at least made like a special move called the Jericho missile.
The Jericho missile. Well, I mean, he used to do a missile drop kick from the top rope when he was younger. But, Jericho missile. So after the demonstration, the convoy is ambushed and Stark is critically wounded by a missile used by the attackers. It's one of his company's own. He's captured, imprisoned in a cave by a terrorist group called the Ten Rings. Jensen, who's a fellow captive doctor, implants an magnet into Stark's chest to keep the shrapnel shards that wounded him from reaching his heart and killing him. The Ten Rings leader offers Stark freedom in exchange for building a Jericho missile for the group, but he and Jensen know that guy's not going to keep his word. So they secretly build a small, powerful electric generator called an arc reactor, more on that in our deep dive section, to power Stark's electric magnet and a prototype suit of powered armor to aid in their escape. Now, first time I saw this, it was awesome. Although they keep the suit hidden from almost to completion, the Ten Rings discover their hostages' intentions. They attack the workshop. Jensen sacrifices himself to divert them while the suit is complete. Moment of silence for Jensen. If it wasn't for him, Tony Stark doesn't get out of that cave. And we don't
100%.
We don't have this universe anymore. So
That's true.
props to you, Jensen.
What if it's all just like a flashback?
I don't know.
Or not in a flashback. It's a dream. Give him another year or two, and all of a sudden we wake up and Tony's just in a cave.
Just a dream.
All these things that have happened is not real. It's just Tony in a cave.
Down that road, would you come back? No one knows.
I feel like that's a good escape plan. Like if Marvel ever gets to that point, we're like, you know what? We've bombed.
Just like
we can't do horror.
was it Saint Elseworld in like it was a TV show where the whole thing was a kid's dream in a snow globe or something.
Can you just imagine just at the end of like their 70-second movie after the credits roll, all of a sudden
Saint Elsewhere.
I gotcha.
Saint Elsewhere. We just spoiled the ending of Saint Elsewhere.
You
never
did.
thought
I've
we
never
would.
seen it.
I've never seen it either, but I do know the ending.
I'm just thinking
David
in
E.
my-
Kelly produced that one.
I'm just thinking in my mind, 70-second movie, it's bombing, it's horrible. So they put out an extra release, and at the end, after the credits, it's just Tony waking up in a cave, and all this is done.
All this is done, yeah. So the armored Stark battles his way out of the cave to find the dying Jensen. He burns the Ten Rings weapons in anger, flies away, crashes in the desert, and he destroys the suit. After being rescued by Rhodey, he returns home. Tony Stark, that is. He wants cheeseburgers. And he announces that his company will cease manufacturing weapons.
Something that's funny to me, though, because I watched this the other day, and he said, he wants an American cheeseburger. So I'm expecting, especially like he's a billionaire, so I'm expecting some fancy thing.
Nah, Burger King.
He's eating Burger King.
You got to get those promotional dollars in.
Hey.
Product placement, man. Which, by the way, if you've never had, I don't know if you've ever had a cheeseburger outside of America. I've had a Swazi cheeseburger.
Okay.
When I was in Swaziland.
Do they have a Royale with cheese there?
I don't know. But the Swazi cheeseburger was put on a hoagie bun. Like it was the full patty, just kind of shoved into a hoagie bun, like sideways. And it still, to this day, remains the best burger I've ever had.
Well, some countries call a quarter pounder with cheese a Royale with cheese.
in The Simpsons, they call it a Krusty Burger with cheese.
And that works too.
Yeah.
No measurement.
And they even have a conversation about, hey, I was at the McDonald's in Shelbyville the other day, and it's the little things that separate them from Krusty Burger. Like, for example, they don't have a Krusty Burger with cheese. Mm-hmm. They call it a quarter pounder with cheese.
You realize they're like quoting Pulp Fiction?
Yes, I do.
Okay, just making sure. You want to make sure you've seen the classic Pulp Fiction.
I have. It's a great scene in The Simpsons too.
Okay.
Anyway, Obadiah Stane, his father's old partner, the company's manager, advised Stark that this may ruin Stark Industries and his father's legacy. So in his home workshop, Stark builds a sleeker, more powerful version of his improvised armor suit, as well as a more powerful arc reactor for his chest. His personal assistant, Pepper Potts, places the original reactor inside a small glass showcase, and though Obadiah Stane is requesting details, Stark, who is a little suspicious of his father's old business partner, decides to keep his work to himself. Mm-hmm. At a charity event held by Stark Industries, reporter Christine Everhart informed Stark that his company's weapons were recently delivered to the Ten Rings and are being used to attack Jensen's home village. Stark dons his new armor. This is an awesome scene. Flies to Afghanistan, and he saves the villagers. While flying home, Stark is attacked by 2 fighter jets. Another awesome scene we'll talk about in a minute. And he reveals his secret identity to Rhodey over the phone in an attempt to end the attack. Meanwhile, the Ten Rings gather the pieces of Stark's prototype suit, and they meet with Obadiah Stane, who's been trafficking arms to criminals worldwide, and he has staged a coup to replace Stark as Stark Industries CEO by hiring the Ten Rings to kill him. Stane has this massive new suit. We refer to him as the Iron Monger. And he's seeking to track his company's illegal shipments. Stark is sending Pepper Potts to hack into its database, and she discovers that Stane has hired the Ten Rings to kill Stark. Pepper Potts meets with first appearance of our boy, Agent Phil Coulson from S.H.I.E.L.D., an intelligence agency, to inform him of Stane's activities. Obadiah Stane's scientists cannot duplicate Stark's miniature arc reactor, so Stane ambushes Stark at his home and takes the one from his chest.
Might as well.
Might as well. I mean, it's just
there.
lying around.
He knows where it is.
Stark manages to get his original reactor to replace it. Pepper Potts and several S.H.I.E.L.D. agents attempt to arrest Stane, but he dons his suit and he attacks him. Stark fights Stane, but is outmatched without his new reactor to run his suit at full capacity. The fight carries Stark and Obadiah Stane to the top of Stark Industries building, and Stark instructs Potts to overload the large arc reactor that's powering the building. That unleashes a massive electrical surge that causes Obadiah Stane and his armor to fall into the exploding reactor, killing him.
Dead.
The next day.
And people have a fit when Batman kills somebody.
I know. The next day.
Tony did it multiple times in this movie. Nobody counted that.
The next day, at a press conference, Stark defies suggestions from S.H.I.E.L.D., and he publicly admits to being Iron Man.
Might as well.
Just a 4-word phrase. I am Iron Man. Mm-hmm. And then, wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah?
In a post-credit scene.
What's that?
S.H.I.E.L.D. Yeah, this is a scene that happens after the credits. For those who stuck around, this was not common back in 2008.
No.
People who stuck around to watch, to see if they knew someone in the credits, they were rewarded with a little post-credit scene. S.H.I.E.L.D. director Nick Fury, played by Samuel L. Jackson.
Speaking of Pulp Fiction, there he is.
Yeah, there he is. Visits Stark at home, telling him that Iron Man is not the only superhero in the world, and explaining that he wants to discuss the Avenger Initiative.
What he should be telling him is like, hey, 2 months from now, there's this guy, Batman, who's going to be coming out fighting this guy, the Joker. You guys should totally team up.
Totally.
You both got a lot of money. You should probably do some great things together.
Yes. Kyle?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on this film?
I'll be honest, I didn't know a thing about Iron Man until I watched this movie. And I don't mean that I didn't know anything. I knew he was this guy that wore a metal suit that was yellow and red, and he could fly and shoot blasters out of his hands. But that's about as much as I knew. I remember first seeing him on Spider-Man, His Amazing Friends, and then later seeing him on Spider-Man, the animated series. So I had an idea. I knew he existed. I knew about him. Toys, I knew, from playing different toys and stuff. I knew that he existed. I knew that he was part of it. But, growing up in the 90s, you watched the X-Men. You watched Spider-Man. You watched Batman. You had all these shows, that specifically with this. So you knew those characters a lot more. If you weren't into comics, if you didn't know about all that, you missed out on all of that. And some of these characters you missed out on. And same way Iron Man, I think, had his own cartoon series.
He did, but it was not on Fox Kids.
Yeah, it wasn't something I cared to see. I didn't not choose to watch it intentionally. It's just I I don't know. It's one of those things. Looking up today, I found out there was one, and I slightly remember it, but I don't remember a ton about it. But overall, though, like for me now seeing this movie, though, I loved it. It opened up to a world that has forever changed superhero movies and movies in general. But just for me, I don't honestly remember this opening weekend. I don't remember the movie, even being in theaters. I'm pretty positive I saw it in theaters. There's something about it to me that just makes me think I saw it in movie theaters. But I was in college at the time. Any superhero movie that came out, I typically was one to watch in general or anyway. And even if Iron Man, wasn't somebody I knew a ton about, I at least knew who he was. So I probably didn't see it opening weekend, but I'm sure I did go and see it. There was a theater just a few blocks away from my apartment in college, so I went to the movies frequently when something new like this came out. But something that stood out to me that I really love about this movie, other than Batman and everything else, this is one of the first times you really see Marvel characters wearing costumes as they are in the comic books.
Right.
X-Men had come out. I was a big X-Men fan, huge Wolverine fan growing up.
20 years this year. 20 years ago this year. Yep.
And, Wolverine's coming out. You're expecting him to be the yellow and the black and the blue or maybe even the brown, whatever suit. And all the X-Men are just wearing a bunch of leather.
A bunch of gray, dark gray.
And I get it because you've got people that are concerned about, are we going to lose money on this? People aren't going to want to see these guys in goofy-looking costumes. But here comes Iron Man that has to have a suit in general for him to work. Like, he doesn't work as a character without it.
And he could have painted it like silver.
Sure.
But they, in the movie.
Well, they even showed it silver.
Yeah.
Like, they showed, like, your rough draft of what it
silver.
is. And then they finish it the same way, though, when Captain America comes along. Sure, there have been Captain America TV shows and even, like, a corny movie before, too. But, they went all out with it. Now, Hawkeye is probably one of the main ones that finally, probably didn't get anywhere near his actual costume that you would see him in comics. But for the most part, the people looked like who they were supposed to portray. They took that leap, and I think for me, just as a fan, I loved it even more, being able to see these things. Just not holding back,
right.
Not worried about what the world's going to think or we're not going to think about it. But yeah, I don't know. I love this movie. It was cool I feel like going back and watching it now that I've seen all the other movies, you come back and have a new respect for this one. In my mind, nothing about it has stood out before. It's like, oh man, I really like that movie or anything like that. But just seeing the stuff and the things that Tony's gone throughout this entire series, you come back and have a whole lot more respect for him and how he gets his whole start with this thing. So it was really cool for me to go back and see it.
This, as I discussed a couple of weeks ago when we were talking about last week's episode when we were talking about the MCU, I did not see Iron Man in theaters. I did not even see it until after the first Avengers movie came out. It took me 4 or 5 years after it came out to go back and watch it. It was Robert Downey Jr.'s performance in the Avengers that was like, well, maybe I should give this Iron Man, a chance.
Sure.
And I enjoyed it. I mean, it captured you immediately. We'll talk about that in a couple of minutes when we talk about best scenes, but it pulls you in immediately. One of our followers, friends, fans, whatever, Ashby, we'll mention her comments later, but she brought up a great point about the MCU in general, especially with the Iron Man, though, its use of a great soundtrack.
Sure.
And how it opens with AC/DC that just fits Tony Stark perfectly. And from the onset, that kind of set the tone for the rest of the movie and for the rest of the Infinity saga, whatever they're calling it now, for the entire MCU in general. Iron Man, is not my favorite comic book character, not my favorite Avenger. There's so many more ahead of him. But for this being the one that started it all, and especially it came out the same year as The Dark Knight. And you knew there were going to be comparisons to the two movies since they're both DC and Marvel, and they're setting up. The Dark Knight is just an incredible movie, and I can't wait for us to get to that one in a couple of years. But Iron Man definitely held its own, and the comparisons. The Dark Knight was a gritty crime drama. It wasn't. I wouldn't even call it really a superhero movie, other than the fact that the protagonist wears a batsuit. But it's more of a gritty, dark crime drama. Whereas Iron Man, has some moments of levity, some humor injected, and it kind of made watching that superhero film fun. Yes, there was super serious moments, but there was also times where you're like, I'm just enjoying watching this. I know the stakes are huge, whatever, but in the moment, it's a fun watch.
Well, it's probably too like we see that comparison more so now with Marvel movies, and like when DC's still trying to figure itself out and put things out, you see a lot of comparison then. But back then, I'm sure there was some, but even Marvel at the time didn't fully know, hey, this is going to work out and we're going to do what we're going to do with it. There were plans, and hopes, but they still didn't expect what was going to come. Especially with the amount of money they made and just how things, how well received it was. So I'm sure it wasn't. Honestly, it was probably overshadowed a little bit just with the fact of knowing that Heath Ledger had passed away, and yet this so much expectancy for his movie that was coming out, and everybody talking about it. Like that's a movie I remember being in college and talking about. I remember going and seeing it opening weekend. I remember that.
Saw it twice in theaters.
Yeah, like Iron Man, I don't necessarily remember, but it's in a different way, and like it doesn't mean it's not a good movie. It's not anything like that at all. Like I say, go back and see it now. It's a different style of movie in general. Two totally different things.
I think we'd be remiss to mention what a risk Marvel took on using Iron Man to introduce its superhero world, which in general is a huge risk.
Well, I know
like a shared universe.
It was mentioned that like they had wanted Captain America to head it up, but then they regained the rights to Iron Man and the Hulk and decided to go ahead and go for it.
Yeah.
So,
but just back in the mid 2000s, and you tell me if I'm wrong because I'm not a comic book guy, but I've heard it being described as starting out your cinematic universe or your shared universe with B and C plus stars, whereas you don't have any of the X-Men, you don't have Spider-Man, you don't have like Blade, Daredevil, whatever.
Yeah.
You've got Iron Man, who good character, but considered probably a B-level player in the comic
especially
world
for the time.
at best.
Like,
at the time.
Now, I mean, he had major roles. He had been a huge influence in all the comics. So as a comic book reader, if you were well in depth in it, sure, he's a higher ranking person. But until this movie came out, the world didn't really know him the way we do now.
Right.
Versus now, you'd automatically put him right there at the top. I mean, he was in classic, like Civil War and everything else that was brought out as a main player. So I don't necessarily say if you were into comics, you would rank him as a B player. But as anybody else, that just kind of like us that grew up watching cartoons and stuff, I definitely don't think he would be in our top ranking anywhere.
No, definitely not. But I think one of the things that makes this movie is Robert Downey Jr.
100%.
Like to the point where like he made the role his own. I'm saying own like really weird tonight. He made it his own, and you can't picture Iron Man without picturing Robert Downey Jr. now. Like even like if I go back and look through a comic, I feel like
I hear his voice.
I'm hearing his voice. I'm looking and seeing kind of his face on the page, even if it's not drawn specifically like Robert Downey Jr. The success of the MCU, kind of was built on the back of Robert Downey Jr. Just giving an amazing performance and an utterly believable performance as Tony Stark. So I mean, that's the reason. One of the reasons we're still talking about, Iron Man today. So definitely a lot of love going out to RDJ. Gwyneth Paltrow did a great job as Pepper Potts. I thought Jeff Bridges as Obadiah Stane, especially. I feel like that was a little bit of a risk too because again, Iron Man's rogue gallery. I don't know if they're that well known. But I don't
put
know,
it this way: I
don't
didn't
know if
him.
Ironmonger is. I mean, I'd never heard of him before the film.
I literally looked him up last week when I watched the movie because it was one of those things that, sure, if you see something in a movie now that's by Marvel, you know that person's in the comics. But being that this is the first one they put out there, and me not being a huge Iron Man fan, knowing anything about him, I looked it up. Was like, is Ironmonger an actual villain? And he is. And it's they changed it a little bit, but no, he is pretty much kind of what he is. He's a giant, another dude that's just in an even bigger suit. Now, backstory and everything else is different, but I don't know. It's cool to see that even back then that they were taking a leap by taking an actual character and not just being like, here's a villain from today's world, and here comes Tony to save it. You know,
Terrence Howard, who was cast in the role of James Rhodey, I thought did a pretty good job here.
I
know a lot of people preferred him over Don Cheadle. Where do you stand on that?
Going back and watching it now, like it made me want and just wish I could have seen him be War Machine. Not necessarily that I think he's any better than Don Cheadle or would be better. It would just be cool to see his take on some of it, especially Terrence Howard. He's been doing a lot of things in the past handful of years, especially too, and many even before then. But it would have been cool to see his kind of take on this versus, I don't know, just seeing him from different other characters. He's a little on the wilder side, or that side versus Don Cheadle. I feel like a little more on the reserve side with how he plays the character, for me anyway.
Right.
So I think it would be cool to see, but seeing it the way it is now, it's hard to look back and think any other way than Don Cheadle. But it would just been cool to see Terrence Howard do it.
I love Don Cheadle. I think he's phenomenal. I loved him in Ocean's 11. I mean, he's just been in so many incredible movies. I'm not the biggest Terrence Howard fan, but I will say watching him as Rhodey in this movie, like you said, it made me kind of want to see what he would be like as War Machine. I don't mean any harm to Don Cheadle's character because I feel like Don Cheadle did again, I prefer him, but I do feel like Terrence Howard, he seemed like an equal to Tony Stark in this movie, whereas moving forward, Don Cheadle seems like a sidekick.
They at least play together a whole lot more. Right. Versus, I feel like you say Terrence Howard's character was more. It shows a lot more of his stature, where his position, how high kind of ranking he is. They kind of give him that spot. Versus as the movies move forward, Don Cheadle is respected and everything else, but you just don't see that much about the rest of his career and everything else.
I think just in physical stature too, like you mentioned, Terrence Howard's a little bigger, a little taller, and I just feel like he measures up a little bit better, just in terms of appearances. Now, with that being said, I don't know what Terrence Howard War Machine looks like. I really like the Don Cheadle version, and I honestly, I'd like to see the Terrence Howard version, but I like Don Cheadle, and I wouldn't want to get rid of him.
There's nothing about it that I don't like where I'd want to replace him. It would just be cool to see it.
But I do wonder if Terrence Howard had kept that role, would we have gotten a spin-off War Machine movie on his own?
I don't know. It's possible because that's one of the reasons he didn't return was because he wanted more money and they wouldn't give it to him. Yeah. So it's possible they would have just gone all the way out and given him a movie, but. So, I don't know because I don't know if it would have worked as well. Like without the two working together, I don't know if War Machine having his own thing would have been worth it.
Yeah, and then my last comment before we move on to best scene, Samuel L. Jackson, Nick Fury showing up in the post-credit scene. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I feel like Marvel Comics had actually already used Sam L. Jackson as like a template for Nick Fury in the comics a few years prior to this movie.
I don't know.
Like they had asked his permission to use his likeness, like to kind of be an updated version, not the old white guy with the gray streak or the white streak in his red hair.
See, I had read some of that guy because I remember being in high school where our English teacher had like a bookshelf off to the side. Doug Johnson,
Dougie Fresh.
He hated that name. He's an adult. You're an adult now. He probably punch you in the face.
Probably, but I love that man.
But he had these books off to the side on the bookshelf, and there was like a trade, or like a thicker trade of just Nick Fury. So I remember going in there after school or just, during times and just reading that and finding out more about him. So whenever Samuel Jackson pops up on screen and says his name, I'm like, I kind of know who this guy is. Like I got a little bit excited where it's like, I actually have read some of this before. Not enough to know if anything follows in line with anything of the character other than an eye patch. But like
my only experience with Nick Fury was in the video games, what's the Marvel Ultimate Alliance when they released that for the PlayStation 2, and then they had the sequel. I played the first one for the PS2, and Nick Fury wasn't Samuel L. Jackson in that video game. I think in the Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 that just came out for the Switch, I think he is updated to Sam Jackson now.
Nice.
So that's kind of cool. But he had obviously just one scene. And it just kind of opened up a world of possibilities. It was no longer just, hey, here's a movie about a superhero. Here's a world about superheroes, possibly interacting. And as someone who was a fan of superheroes in general, we talked about it multiple times. The team up You know, imagining the team up of all your favorite heroes. You know, when you're playing with toys growing up as a kid, we get to live that out on the big screen now, and that prospect was just awesome. One more thing again, Phil Coulson, who was not a comics character. I don't think. I think he was created for this, but he was an agent of Shield, and this was his first appearance. And he had a few scenes, but he quickly became a fan favorite.
Sure,
and to the point where he was able to parlay his role in a few of these early MCU films into the leading role of a television show called Agents of Shield, which is still going on now. It's in season 7
I need to catch
this
up.
summer.
I think like I'm off on 4 somewhere.
Season 4 is like the high point, but season 5 and 6 are both really good. But
I feel like so many things came out superhero related TV wise that I ended up watching a lot of things, and that one was one that just kind of fell by the wayside.
Season 4 is a thrilling season. It has Ghost Rider involved. It has the human replacements. What are they called? Her name was Ada, but she was a.
Did she rock the Theta?
No,
Theta.
but she was like they could copy like someone else's appearance or whatever, and you know, like you would think it was them, and they were like cyborgs or whatever.
Like a chameleon.
Yeah, not really chameleon. They were built to be like another person. They had them in the comics too. I can't remember their names.
I'm horrible at stuff like that.
But
so I just joke around and pretend.
But they had that. I mean, it was just such an awesome LMDs, life model decoys. That's what they are, LMDs, and just an awesome season. Season 5 experimented with time travel. Season 6 is just has a couple of just mind-bending episodes, and I think season 7 is actually experimenting with some time travel too. So definitely worth checking out Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. But Phil Coulson got to start in Iron Man, and we love him. I think he's fantastic. So, Kyle,
Yes.
they say the best podcast is the one that you never have to play. I respectfully disagree because that makes no sense. I prefer the podcast that you only have to play once. With that in mind, let's take a look at our best scenes. And can I start?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. The opening scene. All right.
It's a great scene.
I watched a little bit of it today while I was working on some stuff during my planning period. And like I mentioned earlier, that opening scene, the music hits. Tony Stark's riding in that the Humvee or the army vehicle, whatever. You know, AC/DC's blaring in the background. He's joking around with the soldiers. You know, he's like, "Oh, you're a woman." You know, I didn't expect that. Which, by the way, I looked at you as a soldier first. That's what we're expecting, right? I mean, he's making them laugh. One guy wants a selfie. He's like, "That would be cool." He's like, you know, "Don't post this on your MySpace," which again, dated reference, by the way. You know, he's joking around, and all of a sudden, explosion. And like that first 5 minutes, it set the tone for the whole movie. I thought it was a fantastic scene. What do you have?
Some of my favorites. One of them starts right from there. I love the building of the first Iron Man, you know, armor in that cave.
Right.
I remember, you know, I love him being smart enough to request the items that he needs to build something to get himself out of there, because he knows that whenever, you know, the guy says that when you're done, I'll let you go free, and he's like, no, you won't. And then the other guy's like, no, he won't. And I don't know, just seeing that and seeing the building and how it all comes together, and seeing how, you know, the soldiers are coming to check on him, and in that split second, like, they're hurrying him to get him finished up, and it's one of those deep breaths, like, is he going to make it? Is he not going to make it? That's a big one for me. And in the same way, whenever he's finally building his new suit, he's doing it kind of like in his garage with all of his cars and stuff around. Me being a car guy, like, it's just, I look around and notice, like, what cars does he have in there? What does he have here? And just the machines that he has and technology that he has available to him. This is the first time, you know, it opens up our minds to things for what's to come in the rest of every other movie, where you can just imagine, you know, something being on top of this table and we're stretching our hands out and dissecting every little bit of it, you know, and everything just kind of being displayed in the air in front of us. And for all I know, sure, stuff like that probably may exist somewhere now, but seeing that on a screen, seeing robots like pretty much almost being like pets or assistants to him to help him put this thing together, even to the reference of him looking over at his hot rod and looking back and being like, you know what, paint it red.
Yeah.
You know, the small little touches of stuff like that. The big thing for me is a transition for him throughout the entire movie, from where he goes from very arrogant, which he still keeps that
A little bit, but not as much.
no, and he comes, to a point he's in a cave where he's realizing that it's his products, it's his, the missiles and everything else that he creates, that he sells to make a living, everything else is put him here pretty much. He's the reason that this thing stuck in his heart. One of his missiles exploded and shrapnel went into his heart because of that. To getting back on land and, just being a different guy where he's sitting down in front of the podium. He's like, we all just sit down. Can we just, chill and hang out for a minute here? Right. And then just saying, we're getting rid of all of this. We're not doing this anymore. We're going to start something else. And, I feel like that can relate to people because I feel like sometimes we'll have our ways about things and we have a life-changing experience that makes us think differently. Yeah. And, it doesn't mean that you rot away. You no longer use your skills. Instead, it's, well, how do I use my skills differently? Exactly. How do I do something different now? So for me, that's just that overall, story throughout the entire movie that continues to grow throughout, the entire series of what we see for Tony Stark, in all the other movies. He still has the arrogance about him, but he still has just that heart about him too, that some reason you can't help but to love the guy. Right. And I think a lot of that, like you say, is Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal of this character. Because, like I said, I can't think of anybody else now that could ever have done that. And I feel like that's a strong way of knowing that they did a great job.
Absolutely.
Because without that, there's other characters that, sure, there's going to be multiple Batmans throughout the rest of our lifetime, or new ones in the middle of, doing their filming now.
Right.
And each one's different, but to come out with a different Iron Man, unless you can make it just a completely different story, because there's been female Iron Man, there's been all sorts of different, people.
Ironheart,
different, not necessarily stealing everything from him, but like if you do something like that, I can see it. But you could never just come back and replace Tony Stark as somebody else now.
Do you remember in the Avengers movie, Captain America says, "Take away that suit of armor. What are you?" Do you remember his Tony Stark's response to that? It was like playboy, billionaire, philanthropist.
Billionaire, playboy, philanthropist.
Well, in one of my favorite scenes is we got to see the playboy side of Tony Stark early on.
Yeah.
Kind of setting the tone for, who he was overall. This reporter, is asking him all these, tough questions, and then they end up together. She wakes up the next morning, he's gone. And, just like, someone who just doesn't care about anybody, he uses people and moves on. We see our first introduction to Pepper Potts in that scene. And, she's basically not necessarily his assistant, but she's like, she takes care, like the way she says, I take care of everything that Mr. Stark requires. In a way, Tony's using her as well. And that's just kind of who Tony was. He uses people to get what he wants, and then he moves on. So, that's one of my favorite scenes, setting up who he is. And because you're setting up that when the changes happen throughout the movie, you can see him transform from the guy who was arrogant, didn't care, used people, to the guy who was still a little arrogant but cared a lot more about. I just hit my mic about the things going on around him. I thought the scene where he flew off to Afghanistan to attack the 10 Rings.
You finally get to see what his new suit can do.
Exactly. I mean, that first reveal of the new suit, that iconic scene where he like presses a button and a missile comes out. He just he comes out behind him and it hits the targets behind him while he's kind of standing there posing. Thought was a fantastic scene.
Yeah.
My other favorite scene, there's actually two, but I'll do one right now. The very last scene where Coulson's given Stark some lines. Hey, tell them this, tell them this, tell them this, and he starts to read this prepared statement, and then he says, "I am Iron Man," and then the reporters go off, and that ends the movie.
Yeah,
fantastic way to end the movie because it sets up, sequel. It sets up, I mean, this was the first time in like pretty much every like superhero film that or mantra we can think of where a superhero was outed publicly, like everyone knew what his identity was, and that's a whole new world where usually in comic or superhero lore they protect their identity because they don't want to put their family or friends at risk from villains, so they keep their identity hidden secret. But Tony, the arrogant fool he is, I mean, he wants the world to know.
Was this scene that makes me feel like I did see it in theaters, because I feel like I walked out after that being like, what happens now? Because he just did tell everybody who he is. I think back to like X-Men, and sure, those people didn't necessarily have like a fake identity, but they also didn't have
They
they
didn't
weren't
really have
known
public
a public
lives.
scale the
Yeah.
same way they did. And if they did go out, you would see them kind of covered up or hiding, their abilities at least somewhat.
Like Cyclops wore the red sunglasses instead of his
Sure.
little
Visor.
yeah.
But I mean, the one that you've seen the most other movies about is Batman, and it's a huge ordeal not to let your identity be known. And that's been going on. It's an arc in comics forever from Batman, and there's a lot of comparisons between Batman and Iron Man. So you think about that same way like Superman. It's pretty obvious who the dude is, but he still puts on that suit and glasses to pretend to be somebody else.
Right.
So I do remember leaving in just that scene being like, okay, this is a totally different character now. He's letting the world know who he is, and I have no clue what to expect from here going forward.
Do you have any other best scenes?
I don't. I mean, there's all the battle sequences and fighting sequences are awesome.
They're
It's
pretty
really cool how
awesome,
they did
yeah.
everything, and it still, for the most part, pretty much holds up. Like the actual filming and everything else does, and CGI stuff.
Right.
It doesn't look, even in the newer movies where they didn't necessarily wear the armor and they were just CGI'd in, you still can notice that somewhat. Versus Tony Stark as Iron Man, for the most part in this movie, you see him as Iron Man. The villain, there is a couple scenes where it looks like the dude just floating in the middle of
Right.
nothing. But either way, like, it's awesome to be, what's it, 12 years old now?
Yeah.
So, I mean, you can't complain about it. But it still holds up. It's not a movie that doesn't.
Incredibly well. I meant to mention this earlier when we were talking about our basic thoughts of the movie, but last year, in honor of Avengers Endgame, I ranked the MCU films and posted on my Twitter account. Iron Man finished 10th, which, is better than half, but I think that speaks to the amount of really high-quality films that we had in the MCU.
But you still rank it there after seeing it again?
I mean, I think, we have to add Spider-Man Far From Home and Endgame into there. So I think those are both better than Iron Man. But that doesn't really, you think 12th, it's not even a top 10 MCU movie. It still holds up today.
Sure.
I think it's a fantastic film. There are other films I prefer, and that's just me preferring it. Like I said, Iron Man's not my favorite superhero. I'm a huge Captain America fan, huge Spider-Man fan, so those movies are ranking up a little higher.
Sure.
That might be my own personal bias.
Sure. There's nothing wrong with that.
But yeah. The only other scene we've talked about already was the end credit scene with Nick Fury. And just fantastic again. Like you said, well, what happens now? Well, when you see that scene, oh wow, the Avengers. Oh my goodness, what's going to happen? I mean, what's really going to happen now? I mean,
The funny part is I don't think I stayed for that because
why would you?
it was never known to you stay for a movie and see something. Now you go to the movies. We literally watched Jumanji the other day, and we're like, "Do we stay?" And we did because there's a scene in Jumanji now.
Literally in every kind of film that we go see in the movies, when the credits come on, one of us gets our phone out and types in the movie and end credit scene ?
Yeah, just to see if we need to stay.
There is I mean, so I know it wasn't the first time they've had end credit scenes. I think I know Napoleon Dynamite had one, which I never saw that in theater.
Yeah.
I didn't know
I
that
saw it
until,
like six times in
until
theaters.
Joe Davis told me, hey, there's an end credit scene in Napoleon Dynamite. I want to say one of the Fast and Furious movies had an end credit scene early on. I could be wrong on that.
There's a couple. Yeah.
But it wasn't as wide.
It was nothing. No, you didn't wait at a movie because of this.
The Marvel really set the stage with this. So yeah, those are our best scenes. Mr. Whitley, you've been called the Da Vinci of our time. What do you say to that?
I'd say it's absolutely ridiculous. I don't even paint.
Well, what do you say to your other nickname, the Merchant of Death?
That's not a bad one though. Neither of the rest of these lines. So let's take a look at the best quotes.
All right.
What you got?
All right, so best quote. One of the early ones is when he's taking the selfie with the soldier, and the soldier's throwing up the peace sign, and Tony's like, "Please, no gang signs." Nah, throw it up. I'm kidding. I think that's the levity there again early on. Just so much packed into that first scene. I can't praise that first scene enough for the tone it sets, both dramatic, both shocking, and with some humor injected into it as well. What do you have?
One of mine is the first time we meet Agent Coulson, where he's like, "I'm Agent Coulson from the Strategic Homeland Intervention Enforcement of the Logistics Division." And Pepper Potts like, "Yep, that's quite a mouthful." And he says, "Yeah, we're working on it." He says that a couple of times. Tony says the same thing. And for me, going back and watching it now, because when Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. did come on, I watched it every week until, like I said, somewhere I died out on it. But like
in the first episode, like Maria Hill's character, Maria Hill, played by Kobe Smulders, was talking to Grant Ward, and like she mentioned we're the strategic homeland, blah blah blah, and she's like, "What do you think that means?" And he's like, "It sounds like someone really wanted our initials to spell out SHIELD."
Yeah,
So
but it's cool to see it now and to be like, "Oh yeah, this was already here years before Agents of SHIELD actually came out." So. Another one that I really like, and you briefly mentioned it earlier, but it's when they're trying to build the arc reactor, and they can't figure it out.
Yes.
And Obadiah Stane is like, Tony Stark was able to build this in a cave with a box of scraps.
Yes.
And then finally the guy looks at him, he's like, well, I'm not Tony Stark. So, I mean, it gives you that, to see what Tony was able to do in a cave versus what scientists are able to do with everything, to the, accessible to them. It shows you the brain that Tony has.
Definitely.
That was a quote for me.
One other quote I like is from Pepper Potts when she meets Christine Everhart after the one night stand. Everhart, the reporter, journalist, tabloid, whatever. She makes a comment. All these years, and he still has you picking up the dry clean. Which, first of all, jerk move. She went and got your clothes dry cleaned for you, brought it back to you, so you didn't have to go home making the walk of shame. And you make that comment, but her Pepper Potts' response was perfect. Yes. I do anything and everything that Mr. Stark requires. That includes occasionally taking out the trash. Will that be all? I mean, just a nice little...
Yep, right back at her.
Yep. I've got a couple others that we'll use as segues later, but Tony telling Pepper Potts, let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing. And then the comment he makes to the soldiers in Afghanistan, is it better to be feared or respected? I say, is it too much to ask for both? And to me, that reminds me of an Office quote. Michael Scott says, would you rather be feared or loved? And he's like, both. I want them to be scared of how much they love me.
Yes.
So that's what I have for best quote.
Well, you kind of stole your segue.
That's okay.
Because you quoted it and you wrote the segue. But Eric.
Yes.
Is it better to be feared or respected?
Interesting.
I say, is it too much to ask for both? If it isn't, let's head to the Avengers compound and teach us what we need to know about the arc reactor.
So in this section, we're going to do this for each of the MCU films. We're going to take a little deep dive into one of the things about the movie or about the character that you may not know a lot about. So this first one is on the arc reactor. And in this universe, the arc reactor was a device initially designed by Howard Stark and later adapted by his son, Tony. A massive arc reactor provided power for the sprawling complex of Stark Industries until its destruction and led to the Stark Tower. This design was miniaturized by Tony to power a life-saving electromagnet in his chest, which had an energy output of 8 gigajoules per second. It can keep Stark's heart running for 50 lifetimes, as mentioned by Jensen. Stark responded to that with a yeah or something big for 15 minutes, which... spoiler, plays into Avengers Endgame when Tony's able to harness the power of the Infinity Stones, which would kill a normal human being, and is able to harness it and make the snap at the very end, leaving him alive long enough to do what he needed to do. So I don't know if they had it all planned out. I'm pretty sure they didn't have all that planned out, but they had a callback to this comment, something big for 15 minutes regarding the arc reactor. And that's how Tony was able to harness the power of the Infinity Stones. Further upgrades to the design allowed Stark to employ successive generations of arc reactors, most notably empowering his crowning achievement, the Iron Man armor. Early generations of Iron Man armor were powered by the same arc reactor technology as what had powered Stark's electromagnet device. However, it was poisoning from the palladium within the reactors were having an adverse effect on his health. This forced a radical redesign whereby Tony created a new element previously only theorized by his father years earlier. This new arc reactor had a massive power output advantage over previous arc reactors and was the first to power the formidable Iron Man Mk6 armor. Since their inception, many arc reactors have powered successive generations of the Iron Man armor as a force for good. They've also fallen into the hands of far less savory individuals and used to power further battle suits for criminal operations and a fleet of robotic battle drones. Stark had the arc reactor in his chest removed after receiving surgery to remove the shrapnel from his chest and he later removed that element and then threw the decommissioned unit into the ocean. Stark soon returned to building arc reactor technology and used a number of them to power later generations of Iron Man, and later generations of the Iron Man armor contained multiple arc reactors within one suit. So arc reactor plays a huge part in the Infinity Saga. So, Kyle,
Yes.
you think you're the only podcaster in this world?
Well, I don't think so.
Mr. Whitley, you've become part of a bigger universe. You just don't know it yet. So let's slip on the Infinity Gauntlet, and let's look at 6, one for each Infinity Stone, 6 of our favorite observations and insights from Iron Man. You go first.
One of the facts that I have is Robert Downey Jr. himself. Director Jon Favreau wanted Robert Downey Jr. because he felt the actor's past was right for the part. Up until this movie, Robert Downey Jr. had been in the news for some struggles with addictions and everything else. And so this was a really, a big comeback for him to be now one of the most famous things he's known for. But he said, he wanted the best and worst moments of Robert's life. I've clearly been in the public eye, and he was able to find an inner balance to overcome obstacles that went far and beyond his career. He said, that's Tony Stark. Robert brings a depth that goes beyond a comic book character having trouble in high school and can't get the girl. Favreau also felt Downey could make Stark a likable butthole, but also depict an authentic emotional journey once he won the audience over. So that was me reading from a piece of paper, but from my, there were other big names that were up for possibly winning, or becoming Tony Stark. Like Tom Cruise was one.
Was the big one, yeah.
There were some others, but I did see where it was mentioned that a lot of times, like, to do a little screen test or whatever, big-time actors usually skip that. They're just well-known. They put it in. They put their name in to do it, and they're either decided if they are or they're not. But Robert Downey Jr. came in to do the screen test, and he was in a suit when he did, or a tuxedo when he did it, to even more so portray this character. And with that, you can go see kind of that screen test now, like online on YouTube or whatever. But, he is that part, and he showed it in that audition, and I don't know, it's just cool to see the things that went behind it. It wasn't just some random big-name actor to draw in.
Well, they were taking a risk on him, too, because of his personal demons. His addiction issues also meant that it could be difficult to get him insured for the film.
Yeah.
But he went through with the screen test, and as they say, the rest is history. Number 2, Robert Downey Jr. wasn't the first actor to join the cast.
Nope.
At the time of its production, Iron Man and Marvel Studios were both unproven commodities, crazy to think of right now. And the plan within Marvel was to use the movies to earn money on toys rather than rely on the films themselves to generate major revenue. This meant that Iron Man was made on somewhat of a tight budget for the film of its size and scope, and that led to certain key decisions that would maximize the exposure of the film while limiting the amount of money spent. Among these was the decision to make the first actor cast on the project Terrence Howard, who played Tony Stark's best friend, Colonel James Rhodey Rhodes. Terrence Howard was riding high, fresh off an Oscar nod for his work on Hustle and Flow, and while he still wasn't a megastar, that gave him some prestige. If Marvel could leverage that prestige by putting Howard in a supporting role, they could get another big name on the film's poster and save a little money at the same time. So Howard signed on as the film's highest-paid actor for a salary of $3.5 million, but his time at Marvel didn't last. After he demanded a pay increase for Iron Man 2, he was replaced by Don Cheadle, who remains a MCU co-star 12 years after making his debut. And to compare, Robert Downey Jr., after he impressed Marvel executives with his screen test, he was hired for $2.5 million, plus a potential bonus if the film did well. That sounds massive, but it's peanuts compared to what Robert Downey Jr. earned when he renegotiated his contract with Marvel after Iron Man's success, an estimated $50 million for the Avengers alone. Number 3.
We've already talked on this a lot, so I won't go super in depth, but the whole end credits thing is a big one for this. Like we talked about, it was in some random other movies. But the reason they did it, they said they put it in of credits so it wouldn't distract from the movie. It said didn't want people going, what is Sam Jackson doing in this movie all of a sudden? What's going on? I thought it would just begin the potential conversation of hardcore fans going, wait a minute, could this really mean? Instead of that, though, by Monday, Entertainment Weekly was doing sidebars about Nick Fury and who he was and what that meant. They blew up much faster than what they were anticipating. I know they even said too that they kind of, for the actors on set doing it, it was told to them that was going to be like a dream sequence or something similar to that. So it wasn't even necessarily a real thing in the movie, just to protect it, so they could put it where it is and see what's going to happen. Because at this point, they honestly weren't expecting. They were expecting to make their money back and hopefully make more money with toys, which didn't go 100% great that way. But the movie itself blew up to be gigantic. It was huge. And so it all did work out. Obviously they can do all these sequels and other movies in this universe, but then this was just kind of a little bit thing there that they could throw in. And worst case, if it flunked, then nothing ever really had to come from it. It was just kind of out there. But yeah, this is a new huge thing. How about yourself?
Cool. Number 4, I'm actually looking up another fact because that was my second fact, but that's okay.
Ha-ha.
Ha-ha. So number 4, much of the movie was improvised, and we talked about this at the very beginning of the episode. Iron Man did more for Marvel Studios than generate a solid box office return and launch the ability to make sequel upon sequel. It also established a certain lighthearted tone that has continued through almost all the company's films, and even the darkest ones. That is thanks in part to the improvisation that took place on set. Robert Downey Jr. in particular was apparently fond of interspersing comedy into the superhero drama, and Jon Favreau encouraged it. According to Jeff Bridges, reflecting on the film years later, this was in part due to the fact that the Iron Man script was never entirely complete. He, Downey, and Favreau would essentially conduct improvised rehearsals before shooting, something that Jeff Bridges found troubling until he adjusted his way of thinking about the film. Jeff Bridges said, "John dealt with it so well, it freaked me out. I was very anxious. I like to be prepared. I like to know my lines, man. That's my school. Very prepared. That was very irritating. And then I just made this adjustment. It happens in movies a lot where something's rubbing against your fur and it's not feeling right. It's just the way it is. You spend a lot of energy, we'll use the word complaining here, about that, or you can figure out how you're going to do it, how you're going to play this hand you've been dealt. What you can control is how you perceive things and you're thinking about it. So I said, what we're doing here, we're making a $200 million student film. We're just messing around. We're playing. Oh, great. That took all the pressure off. Oh, just jam, man. Just play. And it turned out great. Mm-hmm. Number 5.
My number 5 is something that was the first time that I ever became aware of this in movies. Now, it's been in other movies, but Easter eggs. Haha, I stole your other one. I'm pretty good at this today.
Tag on, son.
Find you something else to talk about. But Easter eggs was one of the first things, or at least this movie where you can go back now and hear these things. Just a few examples. The Iron Man theme song from the 1966 Marvel Superheroes animated TV series can be heard as Rhodey's ringtone. The Ten Ring Terrorist Organization, headed in the comics and later in Iron Man 3 by the Mandarin, is the group that kidnaps Tony at the beginning of the film. A movie billboard features the Marvel Comics villain Fing Fang Foom, and the Marvel Comics Roxxon Corporation logo can be seen on a building in the background. Of course, Marvel Comics legend and Iron Man co-creator Stan Lee makes his customary cameo. This time is a version of Hugh Hefner. We go to movies now, and now that Stan Lee's passed on, he's not in there. Those cameos, especially now the more and more new movies we get, the less we're going to see unless they throw something else in there. But that was an unheard of thing. I remember seeing it and being like, hey, wait a second, that's Stan Lee. And I didn't even know comics huge, but I still knew who he was. But the random little things like that, the same way you go back now, there's stuff all over the internet of every Easter egg from every single movie ever. But it makes you even look deeper now. Even The Office has little Easter eggs, like on the TV series, the random things that are hidden around on the show. But there's so much stuff like that. But this is the first time I was ever aware of it, to look for it. And to see how things connect from one film to the next just by little hidden things in the background.
A couple other things to add to that. You mentioned the Ten Rings Terrorist Organization, which is headed in the comics and later in Iron Man 3 by the Mandarin. Mm-hmm. It's a group that kidnaps Tony at the beginning of the film. The Mandarin and the Ten Rings are going to return in Shang-Chi, which comes out in 2021, I think February 2021, nice, as part of the MCU Phase 4. And then, of course, the other big Easter egg is in the scene where Pepper discovers Tony removing the damaged Iron Man armor. You can clearly see Captain America's shield on a workbench. And that same scene is shown in many trailers, but the image of the shield was edited out.
I remember seeing that on the internet after, and it was before Captain America was even announced, whenever they saw it, and I got excited. I was like, does that mean that we're going to get a Captain America?
Yes.
And I was really excited about it. And the same way you go back and see these things now, just hidden little things that foreshadow so much to come. It's really cool to go back and see.
We're going to have to start comparing where we get our fun facts from because I think
Well, you've used the first link that popped up on Google.
no, I used the second link, but still.
Well, the first one's an ad. The second one's not. So,
So number 6, Jeff Bridges, and this one's interesting to me because I literally just found it a minute ago. But we talked about the book of Obadiah in Sunday school this past week. Jeff Bridges, hearing that Obadiah was a biblical name, researched on the book of Obadiah in the Bible and was surprised to learn that a major theme in that particular book is retribution, which Obadiah Stane represents. Look at us, bringing the Bible and comic books together, just like our friend from Faith and Fandom, Hector Mira, I think is his last name. We'd like to get him on the podcast at some point. I don't even think he's aware of us, but
that's fine.
But we're aware of him.
We're aware of him.
Check out Faith and Fandom. He's pretty awesome. If you're a big fan of
what we do,
faith and comic books. So Kyle.
Yes.
Do you really think that just because you have an idea, it belongs to you? I mean, clearly, because you just stole all my my fun facts. Our friends, they helped listen to this podcast. Now, what kind of podcast would it be today if they were as selfish as you?
Well,
Fortunately, we are not selfish. I love how this played out. And we love to get feedback from our listeners. So, Kyle, let us know what the people are saying with our social media shout-outs. By the way, that's what we're going to call this segment now.
Social media shout-outs.
So, talk to us.
Awesome. You guys are actually very active this week about this. You were excited about Iron Man.
Especially since we posted it this morning.
Yeah, I'm pretty good about being late for things, but I posted that this morning, and a lot of you guys tuned in. Jenny, I'm assuming this was you because you usually are the ones commenting on our stuff. Says, though I loved Pepper Potts' character in this movie, Iron Man was not my favorite, and if I had seen this one first, I don't know if I would have kept watching the MCU movies and would have missed all the awesomeness of the Avengers. Good friend Matt says he definitely set the bar with this movie. Shame I don't actually recall this movie coming out in theaters. It would have been a blast to watch it in one. He thinks he executed it rather well, talking about Robert Downey Jr. Ethan Brantley says, I just want to eventually want to talk about the almighty Galactus. Hopefully in 20 years.
Hopefully at some point. I don't think we're ever going to do Fantastic Four Rise of the Silver Surfer.
No, but thankfully he's involved in a lot of things, and I know that it's already been hinted that Fantastic Four is coming down the road, and it'll hopefully
you
finally
would think
be done
that
right.
would mean Doctor Doom and Galactus, two of the really awesome Marvel villains. So.
Miss Joy Woods Wright says, love MCU movies, but while I like the transformation of arrogant playboy millionaire Tony Stark into the superhero Iron Man and the rest of the series, Iron Man 1 is not my favorite. I like the development of the character, and the series would not be the same without that development, though. Steve Evans says Iron Man 1 has become better over time to me. It came out a couple of weeks before Speed Racer, in the quotations, one of my favorite films of all time, and I was annoyed at how much attention Iron Man was getting while the critics were panning Speed Racer, which was exactly what I wanted in a Speed Racer movie. In retrospect, the world wasn't ready for that style of Speed Racer at the time. When I finally begrudgingly went to see Iron Man, I was meh about it. The physics really bothered me, but I liked Robert Downey Jr. as Stark and liked the character arc. Looking back, they were setting up a physics don't matter in the MCU precedent, so I'm a little more forgiving. Plus, as a movie, it hits so many beats perfectly. Solid movie, doesn't get enough credit for how well it does. Simply good. And Jordan Edgerton says, this is what started it all. Such a classic. Wish they would have kept Terrence Howard. The favorite scene is when he went against the fighter jets, which we briefly talked about, but it was an amazing scene. So the movie was so good. And the only, I know you've got some on Twitter you can pull up, but while you're pulling that up, I talked to Chris Rode today to get his input. Chris has been busy, so I didn't have a chance to talk to him, so send him a message to see what he thought. He said, man, it's been a while since I've seen it. So I do remember that it showed a good portrayal of struggle and that wealth cannot buy happiness. It's also amazing to see how far the MCU has come and the different changes that occurred once Disney bought the MCU. So I wish I could say this was the OG superhero movie, but unfortunately it is not. I will say it's more of a prototype of how superhero movies should be.
I like that. And
look at Chris being a great reviewer.
Chris with the great insights, too. And then our best comment, or our one comment on Twitter, and I think it's an awesome comment, is by Ashby Brame. She said in a multi-tweet to the What account, look, you can't talk about the MCU without discussing casting. And that goes for every movie, but especially Iron Man. Hindsight is 20/20, but casting Downey was a calculated risk. Even the idea of some sort of comic franchise was a risk. Props to Marvel execs Kevin Feige, but especially unsung hero Sarah Finn. That's the MCU casting director from day one. She's responsible for the genius of Marvel casting, starting with Robert Downey Jr. She has a knack for casting to exacting character standards instead of just looking for stars. I think that casting is in my list of top 3 reasons Marvel is consistently better than DC movie-wise.
Sure.
Another being changing up the directors. At the end of the day, these actors didn't play their character. They are their character, and the pinnacle of that is Downey/Stark. And no, I'm not done. Another thing I think that's super subtle, but is a huge audience payout, also started with Iron Man 1, is music choice. Tony Stark and AC/DC, genius. And the soundtracks for each MCU movie after really acted as underpinning for everything else. And then she says, anyway, thanks for coming to my TED Talk. I responded to her. We're going to have to get her on, her and Chris at some point, because they both have incredible insights and just great deep dives into what this movie represented. She responded with, "Don't you threaten me with a good time." So we'll get Ashby on here at some point. We'll get Chris on here at some point too. So thank y'all for everything with your selections on social media and your comments and everything. We really appreciate it. Like I mentioned at the top of the show, if you enjoyed the podcast, please recommend this to a friend, tag us, and we'll give you a social media shout out next time we record. So I think that's all we have tonight.
I believe so.
All right, friends. A big thank you to Rickie Liles, Tim Hutchinson, our wonderful and irreplaceable producer and researcher. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did, and that you're as pumped for the rest of this journey into the MCU films. Next month, we will be covering The Incredible Hulk.
I really have to go back and watch that.
I'm going to have to find that one. That one's not on Disney+. Not Mark Ruffalo, but Edward Norton. And next week, we're going to be taking a look into the first season of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Go Power Rangers. Until next time, I had my eyes opened. I came to realize that I had more to offer this world than just making things that blow up. And that is why, effective immediately, I am shutting down this podcast. Stay as cool as the other side of the pillow, and we will see you next week.
Bye. What
Bye.
the what?